everybody. Welcome to an episode of the Healthtech Pigeon podcast. Delighted to be joined by Benedikt from Sanome because we're going to be talking about digital twins. And what better person, Benedikt, could I possibly bring on than yourself building digital twins in healthcare? And this is obviously sparked by the news that, ironically, the Digital Catapult has launched a digital twin. In fact, let me get the exact wording: a digital twin centre in the UK in Belfast. We actually put this news into Pigeon, just obviously assuming that digital twins means a human version. Actually, not at all. They're focused on aerospace, defense, and something IoT, something else anyway, but absolutely no healthcare. But still, a fantastic opportunity for us to have a chat about what should they actually do if they are to move into health tech, because I can only assume that they will once they've done these 6 use cases that they're talking about across the 3 verticals. But let's talk about digital twins. So first of all, we've obviously just started working together, and it's not the first time we've had a conversation. You've been on the Health Tech podcast and you've told us all about what you're up to there. But for people that haven't heard that, tell me about yourself, tell me about Sanome, and tell me what you mean by a true digital twin.
That's amazing, and I'm really happy that the terminology is now finally hitting front page news because
Mm,
exactly what we need in healthcare.
mm,
Um, we've got this massive demographic shift that's coming towards us. It's impossible to open up the news this morning and hearing how much the NHS or any healthcare system for that matter is down on its knees. So we need new systems to help clinical teams understand their patients or the population better to move to a proactive healthcare system. And that's where true digital twins or human digital twins can come in. Now, imagine every one of us could have a digital twin copy that continuously analyzes, understands your health, and surfaces information, insight back to clinical teams, allowing them to intervene earlier, proactively. That's the really exciting bit that that's now happening. And it's kind of 2 big pieces of news this week, probably worthwhile combining them. One is that digital twin center. And I'm shaking. I'm like you, like shaking. Why we're not talking about healthcare? That's kind of the most human, most applicable thing we should be talking about. And then the second one being this foresight model, which I'm sure you've heard about, James. Right? It's
mm,
let's use existing NHS data to start modeling and predicting health events. It's like, yeah, that's great. But the bit that we need to do is combine those 2 things. And that's what we're doing at Sanome, is building a true human digital twin that analyzes, understands in real time key data, surface that insight to the clinician, enables early intervention, which is great for the individual, but also
mm,
great financially for the healthcare system, because we all know early intervention is cheaper than late stage intervention.
mm. And I guess, like, when you say that, the thing that comes to mind for me is, so in Formula One, for people that follow Formula One or sport, I guess that's kind of the most accessible way of me thinking about it anyway. That in that sport, you've got a car which has got loads of complex systems, much like the human body. It's got a load of systems that you can be somewhat deterministic in exactly what is going on within those systems, so much so that you can build a digital model of the engine, all the airflow, all of the blah 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 blah. You can build a really complex model, and then you can start changing and tweaking things. You can put it in a virtual wind tunnel and see what the drag is and the downforce and the this and that and the other. And that, I think, is the most sort of accessible version for me. So thinking about this in terms of healthcare and thinking about what your actual vision is here, is it something similar that, and it's funny, like I remember hearing this years ago, even from the likes of Ali Parser and Babylon, that they were thinking of doing something similar, coming at it obviously slightly differently and going from even that, decision tree and AI and primary care and building out that way based on the data that you give it. So going in a slightly different direction. I've heard it from people that model organs and tissues outside the body as well. I've heard it there, and people kind of going in and talking about digital twins from that perspective as well. But are all roads leading to the same place here, including yourself? Is it this literal, digital thing that you can place in the, I don't know. I've just been to Mumbai, so you could place this digital twin in the air quality in Mumbai and see if that links to pulmonary fibrosis in the next 40 years. Something that I was genuinely concerned about as I landed and looked at the smog. Is it something like that, or maybe a drug that I've never had before that you could model based on everything that my genetics plus what I've reacted to previously and all that sort of stuff? Like, is that the vision that literally I can just reach into my pocket and have this, digital person, and I can just manipulate it and just hope it's not sentient and it ends up on Black Mirror that I'm like harming this person in a virtual world?
Yeah, I think it's all of that and more. And for me, the key bit is, where does intervention come from? Who's the person in a society that makes the action on the individual that leads to a better outcome? So it's the physician, but the clinician. So the critical bit to bring a digital twin to life is, the digital twin first and foremost has to help a clinician to understand their patient better. We can talk about the future
Yeah.
shortly. Now, what does that also mean from an individual level? How does it help me understand my health? But ultimately, and the vision I always describe at Sanome is very simple. It's your health understood.
Mm.
The challenge we always see is, human biology is really hard, and we know very, 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 very little about it. And from a clinician perspective, yeah, the problem is very typical. You're time poor, you're overstretched, and you've got to deal with huge amounts of really complex information that very often is poor quality, full of errors, and it's in disparate systems.
Mm.
So the bit where the digital twin then comes to life is, first and foremost, help me understand who is this patient in front of me, and then allow me to do four things. Let's simulate a scenario. What happens if? So your example of, what happens if this patient is now in Mumbai with very poor
Mm.
health? How does that impact? How do I now have to adjust my treatment regime to that individual in front of me based on all of that insight? The second one is, let's analyze and what's happened to that patient. So we're now moving into a future where patients are increasingly hooked up to remote patient monitoring setups. So that data is now giving me real-time insights about the maintenance, coming back to your Formula One example, of, I have a real-time sensor telling me something about that patient, an insulin pump that's now hooked up, like health IoT devices, um, regular blood tests, whatever that kind of bit is, that's giving me analytical capability about how is that patient actually responding. The third one, so we've got simulate, analyze. The third one is predict. So what we always care about is, can we predict an adverse event based on all this information? And that's, as a clinician, really hard to do, because is that going to happen tomorrow? Well, quite possibly, if I'm looking at a septic patient, I can pretty well say what's going to happen in the next 24 hours, reasonably. But what happens if I have a multimorbid, complex patient and I'm trying to predict, I don't know, heart failure in the next 12 months based on lifestyle? AI models are getting really good at kind of starting to pinpoint that. And then the fourth one is testing. And the testing bit is really interesting, and it's kind of very similar to simulation, but I can test, what happens if I give this person the drug? What
Yeah.
happens biologically? There's a ton of digital twin companies now starting to come through that are modeling biology at its most fundamental level, and then start predicting, testing what happens. So, summarizing it, first and foremost, the Sanome vision is, understand your health, help the patient understand the health, and then there's four toolboxes that flow from that, that allows us to use this digital twin to simulate, to analyze, to predict, and to test.
In healthcare, as I say, it seems that people have tried this in different ways and are trying it and continue to do so with varying levels of success. Some that I've talked about certainly still in existence, particularly that, organs and tissues and that kind of thing. Certainly seems like a model that would fit into yours even, others that have come and gone. What's unique about the way that you're doing this? Like, what's the how here? Because it sounds great, and you can see the world moving this way, that genetic testing at birth, everything recorded, all of that data, once you do access the healthcare system, goes into this record and feeds it more data and all that sort of stuff. I can see it, I can understand it. Is that seems like the future? Is any of that now?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, oh my god, this is amazing. Um, so the key bit, in my opinion, is that digital twin needs to be integrated in a clinical workflow. It needs to be
Yes.
seamlessly embedded in that clinical workflow. Two, it needs to be fully regulated. It is a medical device. I'm driving clinical
Right.
making. It needs that regulatory scrutiny, that evidence scrutiny that it works. And three, I think it needs to be explainable. So, and only once it's explainable can we trust it. Will a
I
clinician?
was about to say exactly that. I was about to say exactly this, because by starting with getting the regulatory right, I had written here, not a gimmick and
Yeah,
trusted. That's the
yes,
only way it actually has utility, because it's all well and good me whipping out my phone and having like a 3D model of myself and me
yeah,
poking and prodding and adding in all the rest of
yeah.
it and and something wonderful happens. But you're absolutely right, of like, how does it actually enter the clinical workflow with the clinicians? Yeah.
So that's kind of the key bit that we have been solving at Sanome for the last 2 years, is
Oh,
seamlessly
wow.
getting it into that clinical workflow, which means in clinical terms, it needs to be embedded in the electronic patient record system, because
Yeah.
that's the box that clinician use every single day to record information, retrieve information, etc., etc. So it needs to sit there almost as a clinical decision support tool, for lack of a better word, surfaces the intelligence, gives the clinician the understanding of what's happening in front of me, makes a recommendation about what could be done next, or the clinician doing their workflow. And in order to become an AI CDS, to be regulated, it needs to be explainable, right? So the twin per se is abstracted away from something scary and freaky that kind of sits there. It's at its purest form a decision support.
So that vision, I say vision, you're working on it, you're getting it regulated. It's a big vision that actually incorporates quite a lot of things that are either sort of in existence, that have been trialed or are being trialed. So what I'm saying is things like, I don't know, a predictive model in intensive care to predict deterioration. That's one thing. Another thing might be optimizing drugs for renal outpatients. Another one might be like, there's so many things that you're almost want to call it like a platform, is then sort of pumping out potentially lots of different algorithms doing different things. It's do you own the platform that creates the other thing? Like, this seems big, right? This seems like it's like a watershed moment almost, if you can get the original thing regulated.
Yeah, 100%. So the question we asked ourselves 4 years ago is, if we want to get to this true digital or human digital twin,
Mm.
we need to crack the problem of how do you get insight or insights 100 times faster and cheaper, because that's the big barrier.
Yeah.
That's not the second barrier. Was that it needs to be done on real-time data, because it only works if I can access information in real time. So we set off effectively with a mission or problem statement 4 years ago, is we need to get access to real time continuous data, and two is we need to bring down the cost and time it takes to develop fully regulated, fully integrated, explainable insights. I'm very happy to say that we are basically there now. So
Wow.
real-time continuous access from a number of different hospital groups here in the UK. And that's, I think, one of the big differentiators to, say, Foresight. Foresight has got lots and lots and lots of historic data, which is amazing, and they're doing
Mm.
incredible academic work of analyzing this stuff. But in order to move it to a digital twin world, we need a real-time continuous data connection where we can say, here is an insight model, fully regulated, explainable, seamlessly integrated into the clinical workflow. And we can see in real time how that's starting to change clinical practice. And that evidence now feeds back into the continuous feedback loop to say this model is actually working, delivering outcomes. So we look at the two examples you gave, a deterioration model in ICU. Is that model actually being adopted by clinical teams? Is it leading to good patient outcomes? Is it leading to financial savings to the system? And if the answers to all three of them is tick, 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 we say, wow, that model actually works. Fantastic, off we go.
Mm.
Same thing works in renal drugs for outpatients. We want to have that same evidence. So that real-time connection loop is how you solve it. The second bit around you mentioned called it a platform. Yeah, it's absolutely a platform. Um, the typical cost of developing a class 2B software as a medical device is $3 to $5 million and 3 to 5 years.
Mm.
So as a result of that, that burden of getting in is have to go so unbelievably niche, and we have to then sell that model at such a high price to get an ROI that
Mm.
can't build thousands or tens of thousands of insight models that ultimately aggregate into that digital twin vision where you have one
Mhm.
single model for every single person.
Mm.
That's that clinical decision making piece. And given the real time access to data we now have, given the AI model we have, the foundational model, given the regulatory platform that we have now built, and given the
Mm.
partnership with hospitals and EPR providers, we can very safely say we've brought that cost down 100-fold, the time down to 100-fold. So we can now go from clinical insights to clinical practice in a matter of weeks rather than years.
Mm. So, so again, to house this in an example that people would understand.
Yeah, sorry, I get I get very academic with this.
No, 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 not at all. No, 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 not at all. I mean, and you did so in the ones that I mentioned. You know, that IT predictive model, or renal outpatient drug model. Like what you're saying is that hospitals, and you can see this clearly, that if multiple hospitals are in a real time, continuous data sharing agreement with a company that builds them software as a medical device to solve whatever problem comes up. You can see multiple hospitals then federating that data, and an outbreak of influenza in Scotland means that the guidance in London changes based on something overnight, because
Correct.
you've just had such an influx of data that you realize. And again, like, thinking in real terms here in the world, like, the next pandemic is coming.
Yeah,
it,
100%.
it is like
Yeah,
it is probably in our lifetimes, quite
yeah,
likely in our
yeah.
lifetimes, one or two. And so the necessity of this really is quite alarming. That you look at what happened in COVID, things like dexamethasone, ivermectin, like all these types of drugs that you had all the ITU consultants in London and wider in a WhatsApp group just trying to tell each other what they think is working based on anecdotal data, and them trying to pull things together and just figure out a way through this. This is a very formalized version of that. This real time continuous data sharing, that seems to be the biggest unlock here. And we're talking about this in at hospital level. We started talking about this at the individual level, but it is both, isn't it?
Yes,
And I think to work at the individual level, it kind of has to be everywhere. And if this is everywhere, great. But it sounds like you're starting at the hospital level and going in that way. So yeah, just talk to me about that approach then. Like, going in at hospital level again, is the idea to then those hospitals and groups, like multiple sites, and then are they pumping out various algorithms once how do they ask those questions? Like, becomes a point of like like, the answer's 42, but what's the question? Like, what question am I asking? What algorithm do I want? What problem do I actually want to solve? Like, how do it seems like you're just hosing data now in a way that like I can ask this thing anything. It's sort of like going on to ChatGPT now and like I need to improve my life. I know this thing can improve my life. I don't quite know how. Sort of the same thing. If you're hosing data in between these things now with AI models applied, you can kind of ask it any question and get any answer. So yeah, what's the protocol once you've got a real-time continuous data sharing agreement? What actually happens then for the people that can make a difference?
Yeah, so I've got lots of things to unpack here. So,
Yeah, sorry, I went off on one
no,
there.
no,
That
no, this
wasn't
is
you that
great.
time.
No, this is great, and it's effectively the first few sets of meetings we have with clinical teams once that real-time data feedback is in place. Is people get really excited and they say, "I've had so many ideas over my last 20 years of how I could improve my care.
Yes.
Could you please do this? Could you help me with better
Yeah, that makes sense.
antibiotic?"
That the
Um,
consultants and the clinical directors will be first port of call. Yeah, that makes a lot
and
of sense.
we have nurses coming to us and saying, "How do I communicate my sixth sense better to the locum consultant?
Yes.
How do I communicate that?" The discharge teams come and say, "Can you help us quantify whether a patient's clinically fit for discharge?" Um, your step downs, your step ups, your outreaching. There's so many people that come with hundreds and thousands of different ideas, and it's amazing. But the core nexus, what it always comes back down to, the first baby step, so to speak, is, can this tool help me understand my patient better?
Mm,
Question I need to solve better. And then it's supporting that clinical workflow that then flows from that with predictive insights, whatever that
mm,
may. So then the second part kind of comes to that roadmap piece. We deliberately started in long-term care, rehab care, because it's one of the few cases where patients are monitored very regularly for long periods of time in a
mm.
very safe, contained environment. So we have shown that by working with, for example, the Royal Hospital for Neurodisability, where we have 220 digital twins now about to go
Wow.
live. It's fully regulated.
Wow.
Each one of those patients would have a digital twin, and the model would now do two things. It will look at that patient continuously and say something's about to change in that individual. And it does that by looking at the data trends that are happening there and then. It will look at things like something's changing around that patient, and that could be something like nursing behavior. So suddenly the nurse is mentioned in the clinical notes that patient slept badly, or the observations were done repeated a couple of times, or the medication wasn't given. All kind of subtle stuff.
Mm,
So the model starts seeing that something's changing with the individual, and then it also compares it to all of the history of what it's seen before. That's why we've also called the model memory, because it's the memory of all the patients I've ever seen, but also that individual. What's happened compared to yesterday, and now it's starting to drive that clinical decision making by saying, "Hey, this patient is starting to develop a hospital acquired infection. You should do something about it." This is happens to be a good example because we are imminently regulated as a Class 2B medical device in that setting,
wow.
which I think we'll be one of the first companies globally in that space, have a multimodal, time aware, context aware AI that does that. But coming back to kind of that roadmap piece, we're now moving from that long term care into acute care. Why? For two reasons. One is the cost of adverse events in that setting is really, really high, both on a human level, but also on a financial level. And that also helps you from getting that buy-in from clinical teams that, look, we have detected, I don't know, AKI, so kidney failure, detected intubation or decomposition events or whatever that kind of bed is. Um, and from that, you can then slowly start moving into that primary care setting, because we've got to move into that next world where patients can't be clustered into primary care, secondary care, tertiary care, because patients generally are complex and multimorbid. Very often they're being treated by different care teams in different settings at different time points. So what the model now needs to do is saying, hey, I'm helping you with your diabetes and predicting different events in the diabetes setting. but you're also starting to develop a cardiovascular problem that needs your first point of call there would be you go to your GP and you say, like, I'm short of
Mm,
pain and whatever that journey. So it's that digital twin needs to start carrying that information into the different settings. So when I now go into the GP, it loads up all the history and the GP. Yes, you could read the clinical notes and it would say it's been treated for diabetes, but it's had a prior history of. It also now loads in that very specific patient unique data around um, the types of drugs you've been using, the previous history you've been
mm,
going into, the complaints about it. And it starts surfacing that intelligence back to the GP and said, okay, I can now focus on the patient in front of me rather than spending 20 minutes reading clinical notes and trying to
mm,
figure out who it is and actually not get it.
mm.
And I was at an event this morning and someone cited it, and I have referenced it to see if it's an academic study or peer reviewed study. But they're now saying that patients or humans are being more truthful to chat GPT about their health conditions than they are with their physician or with their
Mm.
therapist. That I could see that, right? And that's quite worrying because, yeah, how can a physician or sorry, clinician build a picture of your health if not all the information is available?
Yeah. It's actually so that's really interesting. Actually, this is something that I've actually done quite a lot of reading on and work on. One of the reasons they're more truthful to LLMs is because LLMs don't judge, and
Yeah, yeah,
one of the problems with healthcare that we've had over the last, I mean, what, 50 years is this the decreasing continuity of care,
yeah,
because actually what the evidence says is that patients will they will deliver a quality history in direct correlation to how empathic they perceive their clinician to be. So
yeah,
if it's the first time you've seen that clinician, you don't know them at all,
yeah, yeah,
you are not going to be very truthful because your
yeah,
natural human instinct of fear of judgment will kick in
yeah,
unless that clinician is incredibly good at building rapport incredibly quickly. But even then, it's it's sort of dose dependent on empathy that the longer you take building a relationship with someone, the more truthful you're going to become. So this people are more truthful to LLMs is actually a symptom of the issue that we know across care that this still solves, which is free
yes,
us up to be human and to
yeah,
have that relationship with patients so that they are more truthful with us, and then we
yeah,
can deploy our empathy in the right places. And so that's a super interesting space for me. It's actually what I'm talking. The reason that this view, if anyone's watching on YouTube, is because I'm in Australia and I'm in my hotel room. So I'm speaking about this exact thing at the Digital Health Festival on Tuesday. So it's what my talk's on. And trying to get to a place where we actually consider what empathy level is required, what is AI very good at, and actually let's reserve these things. Let's reserve any conversation in oncology for human to human empathy. And but actually, there's some things that AI can do pretty well. It can do cognitive empathy very well in a synthetic form. Actually, if we want to make healthcare sustainable, we shouldn't say that every communication um, has to be human to human. We do have to deploy that somewhere. So actually, there's these things that it could. Anyway, that side of things. One thing I do actually want to bring up, evidencing the sixth sense you talked about with digital twins. I think that could be. I think that's actually potentially like a new frontier of medicine. Um, One thing that I remember speaking to Hamza at MindStep about was that, again, not to do him a disservice at all, but kind of accidentally coming across brain fog and ending up collecting a load of evidence that brain fog is actually a cluster of symptoms with a cause and an effect to the point where they can get a disease classification on it and actually doing that work. So it's not just perceived as, oh, you've just got a bit of brain fog because blah,
yeah,
nebulous concept. No, like a lack of cognition below baseline caused by these things that leads to this is now a disease classification and that side of things. So and just to tell you a story about how impactful that might be, I was in A&E. It was towards the end of my A&E placement, so I was sort of on the more confident side after
Mhm.
doing, a couple of months of A&E,
Mhm.
um, as opposed to completely petrified when I first started. So,
Yeah,
that's not to say I was confident at all. I was just slightly above complete zero in terms of my confidence. But I remember seeing this lady in her 40s, who came in looking a little bit pale, but nothing really was the matter too much. Like a little bit low hemoglobin, but again, not really anything to write home about. Anyway, she's going to breach. She's going to breach. It's coming up to 4 hours. You need to discharge. You need to discharge. I'd no actual reason to keep this lady in whatsoever, and for whatever reason, I just waited until the last possible moment, and I could not tell you why. But I think maybe so, like in my subconscious, I'd have picked up something about how pale she was, something about the way she was moving, something in the history, something about her tone of voice, something about the content of her history maybe not making sense, or it was probably a collection of so many things. Anyway, just before she breached, massive hematemesis, ended up in resus, perfed an ulcer, turned out to have lied about her alcohol consumption, turned out that she was drinking a lot of units,
yeah,
but did not, seem that that was going to be the case, did not present as someone that you would think that was common in. And there was just, and every clinician I think has got one of these stories that there's just something that they can't put their finger on, something's not right. I actually see what you're talking about as a route to genuinely plotting that, in the same way that Hamza and Mindstep have plotted brain fog and have now got a disease classification for it and that kind of thing. I think that could be such a powerful piece of work that genuinely starts to add clarity and add data points and add confidence as a result in areas where significant morbidity and mortality will be happening, because we've assumed that we're top of our game in terms of the science in these broad categories, whereas actually we know for a fact that we're not. And anyone that's worked on ITU knows that most people hardly even get a diagnosis. So there's
yeah,
loads that we don't know what's going on. So
yeah.
I don't know if you've thought about, but that is a for me like a real potential positive.
I'll share a very, very, very personal story that I think will bring this to light. Short answer is yes.
Mm,
um, my brothers and I lost my father to suicide
mm,
uh, a while back. And yes, he was multimorbid, and yes, he was a very complex patient. And suicide is a really difficult one because if you know the person well enough, you kind of know. It's that back to that sixth.
mm,
Yeah, they withdraw themselves. They may seem happy on the outside, but inside they're in turmoil. And things change. Maybe they get up a little bit later. Maybe they're spending more time on their phone. Maybe their language changes. Right, all of the things you were just describing in your example. And he went to see the doctor. Right, he went to see a therapist. He went into acute care for various different reasons. And in looking at the investigation afterwards, the inquiry, individually, they did all the right things. I mean, he went
mm,
to the GP because finally he had enough trust in the GP to talk about a lump in his testicle. Um, yeah, but the GP had a 20-minute or 12-minute appointment and they talk about it, didn't get a chance because he was looking at all of the history, trying to build a picture, didn't get a chance to actually say, "Hey, Tim, is everything okay?"
mm.
Having that conversation. Maybe he went to the GP because somehow in his mind he wanted to talk to someone about suicide. Well, he was bipolar, so that's very common. Maybe he went to see a therapist, but didn't get the time to connect with the clinician to talk about what was actually going on.
Mm,
And he reached a point where he took his own life. And if what does that mean for me and Sanome and hundreds of thousands, if not millions of other people is, that sixth sense is why we seek health. Well, we go to healthcare because we want to be cared for. We
mm,
expect the clinician to understand me, right? I don't want to talk about my alcohol consumption. Maybe I don't want to talk about my mental health. Maybe I don't want to talk about my potential testicular. But I'm still going because I'm seeking help, but I expect the other person to understand me. So that is what we are doing at Sanome. That's where I see digital twins coming in, because we can understand not only physiological symptoms around an individual, your vitals, your lab tests, as you said, the blood values were okay, they kind of looked pale, but something else was there.
Mm.
And that something else very often is in the data. And there was a brilliant study published in the US, I think it was Nature Medicine a week or two ago, where they were looking at nursing behavior. And it's called the Concern study, where they're looking at metadata within the EPR. They run a cluster RCT to evidence it. Is that nursing behavior? Can that detect patient deteriorations earlier? And the results are really, really interesting. They are, right? And we've seen that in our models as well, that looking at, yeah, we talked about it just a few minutes ago. That's not fully the sixth sense, but it's starting to move in there because they're reflective of a sixth. The nurse went and repeated the vitals, not because they were off.
Mm.
They felt something wasn't right. They wanted to double check. Or they, in the clinical note, patient appeared pale, or which in its own right is kind of meaningless unless you've got a really good rapport and you know that kind of carer doctor relationship is such where when the nurse said that that patient's pale, I damn well listen. What you
Yeah.
were saying, it's something's there. We can't put our finger.
Yeah.
We can't. It's not an ICD-10 billing code.
This is it.
um, and I think that's where it becomes so powerful when you
Mm.
yeah, a digital twin for every single person. And it doesn't need all the data. It different data points about you. Support the clinician with something's not right, but I think it could be this. Why don't you? And it frees up time. Ultimately, it's freeing up time to what you were saying is provide the care limit, which I would say is that's why everyone goes into healthcare, because I want to provide care to the individual. I don't want to sit there in my EPR clicking through 10 different systems under pressure and say, I've got to discharge, got to find a reason to discharge. Whereas your brain is screaming, something's not right. But you've got to find the time. You've got to bump the next meeting. I've got to investigate. Sorry, that was a long.
Well, listen, I thank you for sharing all that, Benedict. I think the you're right. It's such important work, this, because in that example that I shared about that lady in her 40s, her hemoglobin was actually okay,
Yeah.
but it wasn't okay for her.
Yeah.
She probably ran her hemoglobin quite high.
Yeah.
She was probably dehydrated, but again, the numbers didn't particularly show it
Yeah.
because they were bad for her. They weren't
Yeah.
bad.
Yeah.
And so it didn't really show me that she was losing the amount of blood that she was internally. And so that type of thing. And then, my seniors were then pushing me to, discharge.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's why in A&E, particularly actually as a clinical area where you only do get a snapshot,
Yeah.
you only have that snapshot, this
Yeah.
becomes incredibly important to do,
Yeah.
because the digital twin component to this means that that whole system understands you. To your point about that's what you want of the clinician in a perfect world. This is what we all want. We all want to go and see the GP, and God forbid what happens to your father happens to other people, but we want to go to the GP and feel understood. If we
Yeah.
feel
Yeah.
understood, we're going to disclose more. If we disclose more, that's more data. The system picks it up, things get better. It's interesting to me that there's a lot of roads that lead there, of which you're on a few, in that you're helping increase the amount of data, you're helping give time back to the clinician, you're helping to also compute extra data and show that more to the clinicians. This gets to the problem via multiple mechanisms, which I think is so important. It kind of points to, like, you must be on the right lines here, because it is, there's a lot of birds with one stone here. Um, my question, quite specifically at this point, this is obviously quite a difficult thing to do, and I can remember Humor doing something similar when they tried to regulate an entire platform, and they managed to do it. to regulate a platform that could then spit out software as a medical device, which is kind of the model here, right? Like you're
Yeah.
having to you're having to regulate a thing that can do a lot, that's then going to pump out more things that do something quite specifically in specific areas. So is it that you're going to have to regulate the mothership and the baby ships, or is there a way of just regulating the mothership like Humor did?
This is should I give away the
Are you
yes?
sick? Are you sick of having this question, by the way?
So this is really interesting, and I think what Dan and the wider team did on the regulatory front, it's been really breaking ground. It's really
Mm,
working with the regulatory authorities of how do we effectively regulate the entire factory, the
mm,
platform. Because if
mm,
we can get that done right, we can bring down the cost and the time of building models really, really quickly. Now, very interestingly, the team that we're building here at Sanome, um, they were with Humor before. So,
fine. Okay.
yeah, so we've got the tripartite winning team, Areski, Arash, and Nita, uh, back here at Sanome, basically
Yeah,
saying, we want to do this
fine.
at scale. Both Arash and Areski are advisors. Nito's with us full time. They hate being in the limelight, but what those guys have managed to pull off is short. And I think that learning is really, really, really powerful because I mean we're working very openly with Scott James at Scarlet Comply, and we're really trying to figure out because getting the stuff regulated, yeah, it's tough and cumbersome, and very few companies go down that path. But actually, what happens after that is the bit that I'm really interested in. How do you build an MLOps platform that monitors your AI in clinical practice? That looks at how does the model perform over time? Is it still delivering the value that
Mm,
certified for? We all know that data changes over time. How
mm.
does the model perform on that? Yeah, we might have changed the thermometer that we now use. So the data now is changing. Right? We,
Yes.
we know that data in a rural hospital is going to be very different in a city hospital. We know that data is coded and stored differently in different setups. How do we build a platform that not only gets the stuff regulated, but ensures that the regulated tools are actually performing they are. And
Mm,
anyone listening here, I would love to geek out on things such as local model validation. So how can you build use the term like a mothership, one model to rule them all type of thing?
mm,
But how do you then validate that on a local setting and have that local setting fully regulated
mm,
and validated within, even though it's performing very differently to the master model at the top,
mm,
you don't have regulatory mechanisms in place to do that. Right at
mm,
the moment, the regulators are saying, "Well, generalize the model to us, and we will kind of assume that it kind of works," which is the only chance we've had to this date. But we've had a lot of the bias that we have in medicines, in medtech, has come from exactly that side. But models have drugs have not been validated on women for a very long period of time, or not properly.
absolutely.
Effectively take that same approach. We got a drug that's been validated at the top and then validated on a local setting with the evidence being generated on the local setting to say the dosage for this patient population on my local level needs to be different. And we're doing exactly the same thing, working with regulators to do that. And it comes back to that real time data pieces. You can only do that if you have real time continuous access to data because we drop it in and we see how the model performs and it feeds back to the original bit. And it's way more than just the factory. That's the here.
Because it's taken out sort of post-market surveillance as a step,
Yeah,
and it's just
yeah,
sort of building it
yes, yeah,
into the model itself, so
yeah.
it doesn't need this exercise of post-market surveillance. It's sort of always intra-market surveilling itself, like, I guess, which has to be gold standard. Like, surely that should be what we're aiming for.
Yeah, and I think Scarlett are doing a lot of work at the moment of communicating that and say we need to start thinking about proper AI PMS, PMCF, so your post-market clinical follow-up studies.
Right.
Uh, we need to start monitoring these things. We need to go over and beyond of what is
Yeah.
required from a regulator point of view, which is reporting adverse events from time to
Yeah.
time. What happens if you can suddenly monitor the performance over time? It triggers, and the US is quite good with the FDA and their guidance around pre-approved change control plans to say the model's starting to deteriorate. It now hits certain thresholds after which it needs to be retrained and rebuilt,
Interesting.
and automatically it needs to be redeployed. But how does a regulator go about it? Because what we can't do is wait 3 months, 6 months, 12 months for the notified body to come around and say, yes, it's done again. And it's bringing those innovation cycles or building cycles down to ideally sub 24 hours. Well, that would be the dream. Because we do that in software, right?
Yeah. Seems
So
eminently doable.
exactly. So I mean, a tagline I've been playing around with is basically, let's build SAMDs that scale like software.
Why not, I guess. Um, Before I let you go, mate, the digital catapult, obviously they didn't include healthcare. Let's say let's say they have a little listen to this and they think, we should have included healthcare. Let's have a chat to Benedikt. What are you going to say to them? How should they set this up? And I should say that one thing that they're doing is that they've launched this accelerator. I'm just going to pull this up so I get the wording right. Um, Expressions of interest now open for the first UK Digital Twin Centre Accelerator Programme to support partnerships between SMEs and industry to fast track adoption. And they're doing that in maritime, aerospace, and defence sectors. God, I mean, it sounds incredible if they were to do that in the healthcare sector. How do you think they should go about doing that? And who would be, along with yourself, obviously, what other types of companies do you think would form a good group here that would be working on digital twins? You have to name them specifically, even just the areas that they might be in or things they might be doing.
Really, really good. So we have a lot of our partner hospital groups, NHS trusts, are really keen on opening up this collaboration. We have this real-time data sharing. We have the integration into the EPRPs. We have
Mm,
parties. So there is a tripartite way of going about it, because I think the key bit always comes back to, it has to be trust, right? If I were to say come and work with me, it's always, I'm industry. Ultimately I have a profit motive, but having an NHS partner in there say it's fundamentally about bringing innovation to our patients that benefit our local patient population. So I'm very happy to have that conversation and say, how do we actually create something here that a startup or an established company could come here and say, hey, I would love to build a digital twin model for diabetes care. Right? How do we hook in the system? We can monitor the real world system. How do you build an end to end connection piece where the data is flowing, the insights are coming back, and the intelligence is surfaced back into the EPR, and it's regulated, seamlessly integrated?
yeah.
That would be the dream comes true, because then we're really turbocharging innovation. Um, I don't think we need to go super fancy and let's go model entire human biology, which some companies are doing, and they have the funds to do that.
Yeah.
Uh, I think we can do lots of baby steps first. Companies or categories of companies that I think would be really interesting to think about are, there's a bunch of companies using digital twins in clinical trials. So examples would be like Unlearn.ai in the US that are trying to build synthetic data, create a digital copy.
Is that
Let's
Charles Fisher? Is that
I
Unlearn.ai?
remember the name.
Yeah, okay. I've spoken to him on the
Um,
podcast before, actually.
it's super cool in that space. We have others that are doing the more biology first approach. So Bioptimus would be one that comes to mind, that are trying to model human biology at its most fundamental level and then build
Wow.
models that start stacking up. Syntenza would be another one. Um, then you've got the organ modeling groups. We're part of the Royal Society of Medicine's Digital Twin Consortium. That's a strong push for there. Can we model a lung? That becomes really hard to do that in an NHS setting, because that type of data typically doesn't exist. Uh,
Mm.
and then the stuff that we're focusing on, which is ultimately clinical decision support
And real world data, yeah.
in real world data, that translational piece. I'd love to go to the Foresight group and say, hey guys, let's collaborate. You've built some massive population level insight models. Let's take some of those models, integrate them into Sanome's multimodal stack, to support the individual models that we pop up that then support that decision making. That would be great. So I mean, Richard and James Teo, if you guys are listening, give me a ping. I can't work with you.
We can clip it and tag them, Benedict. We'll do that. We'll do that.
Let's do that.
Listen, absolute pleasure. I think this is obviously it feel as I said before, it feels like a bit of a watershed moment. It feels like we in healthcare and health tech are on the brink of something here. We've had skin analytics is class 3 come
Yeah,
out. We've
brilliant.
had Humor do their thing, a few months ago. Um, there's a lot there's a lot of health tech history being made at the moment, and there's so much more to come. It is such an exciting place to be. Digital twins, it's going to happen. It's a question of
When?
when, not if. And
Yeah,
actually, with what you're saying, if you can get this mothership regulated in the very near future, which it sounds like you are, there's a heck of an opportunity to capitalize and start making some serious impacts across the system. So I wish you all the best of luck with it, mate. And thank you for being so open and sharing so much on the podcast today. For people that want to learn more about what Sanome is up to, or they want to get in touch with yourself, what is the best way for them to do so?
go to a website, find me on LinkedIn, WhatsApp. You can also go to Voyagers, find someone you know who's a Voyager, and then get on WhatsApp. Now, I love working with people. I think healthcare is a collaboration play. I think people need to work more together. We need to share together because even building this true digital twin, you were talking about, yeah, we need NHS partners, we need hospital providers, we need data providers, we need integration providers, we need EPR vendors. You need device manufacturers. All of these people need to start coming together, and everyone needs to participate. And a kind of closing note, I think if we want to move towards a value-based care model, which everyone's been talking about for decades, we need that real-time data feedback loop of saying, I've delivered a piece of innovation, a piece of intervention, and it's delivered value, and I can evidence that value. And that's only possible if you have that real-time data loop. We have that. We are ready to do that. So anyone who wants to work towards a VBC future, proactive VBC future, please get in touch. Want to work with you.
Awesome. Thank you, Benedict. For everyone listening, thank you. This has been Health Tech Pigeon. If you want to get the news from the rest of Health Tech, you can go to healthtechpigeon.com, subscribe to the newsletter that hits your inboxes every Sunday. I don't know if we're still going to include this. It doesn't actually have any healthcare in it, this Belfast Digital Twin catapult, but we'll see. It might be in there. But anyway, this has been Health Tech Pigeon. We'll see you all next week.